Okay, so a very easy introduction for me to the next speaker, probably the easiest name that I'm going to be able to say as it's my own. So welcome to Changing Landscape of InsurTech. For anyone that has joined, that didn't join the introduction, I'm Tracey Smith, really focused on innovation in insurance, what insurtechs can do with insurers. My background is from Conveyor as head of InsurTech, Direct Line in a similar role in InsurTech, and really looking at how we get that collaboration to work. The starting point of this presentation, I think it's quite important, is say, what am I talking about when I'm talking about InsurTech? And what do we really mean in this space? So as much as we think that insurance is very traditional and it hasn't changed forever and ever, in reality, insurance has been using tech for a long time. Whether the tech is good or not is a question, but we have, since computers were created, insurance was a user of that computer and has advanced as we go through. And there has been insurtechs in the past. So if we look at some of the big software providers now in insurance, the likes of Guidewire, Duck Creek, they would call themselves insurtech. But when I'm talking about insurtech in terms of this landscape, I'm really talking about sort of the startups that came through in the 2015, 2016 plus. So this was taking on what was happening in the fintech space and really asking that question, how do we disrupt insurance? And that's really the starting point for this trend in insurtech, I would say. So 2015, 2016, and it's across the whole of the insurance value chain. So it's companies looking to truly disrupt the actual insurer and become insurers themselves, looking to be brokers, looking to be MGAs, through to those services looking to work with the insurers. So the SaaS services, the artificial intelligence services. So all of that in this big insurtech bracket. So where are we today is the big question. And I think there should have been a poll, and I'm not sure if it's on the app or not. So I'm going to have to use the room, and I'm sorry to the people that are online. But quick show of hands, where do you think insurance is in terms of use of AI? So we'll start with no use of AI, or pretty much zero. Okay, no one. A little bit of use of AI, but not really making a difference. 2, pretty good use of AI. Good number in the room. And leading in the space in terms of using AI, so one of the leading industries. Yeah, which is definitely not ever going to be one of the leading industries, maybe. But that's really interesting, I think, that we're already seeing that there's lots happening in this space, and it makes sense that there is. The reality is, insurance at its base is a data industry, and therefore, using that data, how do we use that data better? How do we learn from that data better? And that has always been happening. We're now getting in this space of how do we use the tech? How do we, get the data better, which is part of the challenge, especially for the incumbents, and then how do we use that data better for the customer, for the employee, and to deliver that value and deliver that value from the shareholder. So this graph, I think if you've been to any InsurTechs talks recently, I think you've probably already seen this graph or heard similar numbers. So this is really interesting because it shows the growth of investment in InsurTech. So the top number is actually the number of deals. The line on the graph is the total amount in millions. So in 2021, we had 13 billion raised. And then the difference between the two blues is just the bigger deals and the smaller deals, so the deals over 50 million. So clear, obvious trends. First of all, as I said, this really started in 2015, 2016. So companies were having this idea, yes, we can play in insurance, we can disrupt insurance. New thinkers coming in that weren't from the sector and raising that early seed round money and seed and Series A. And we can see that growth kind of was pretty consistent from 2015, 2018. And then companies really started to deliver that value. The interest started to come in. And we're coming through into 2019, 2020. Despite COVID, was the most successful year in terms of raising money until we get to 2021. Within here, there is some very big deals. So the unicorns really came through in this 2021 time. But there's also still seed stage, and actually quite positively, there's still some new companies coming in. I think the interesting thing what this graph gives you is these companies are now in a different place. One of the reasons why it's difficult to disrupt insurance and it's difficult to challenge in this sector is because it's expensive. It's an expensive sector to play in. It's an expensive sector if you want to go to the customer in terms of customer acquisition. It's difficult to work with insurers if you're not big enough and you can't prove that you're big enough and that challenge and that risk. These companies are now in a different place. These companies are now well funded. They now really have that money to look at how they scale, look at how they grow, and how they really deliver value. I think that then links to this. We're now at around 24 unicorns in this space, so companies valued over $1 billion of InsurTech, and a lot of them have come in that 2021, 2020 period. Now, if we compare this to fintech, fintech is, I think, at 284 at the moment. So still a very different space, and I think it's still very different in terms of how much has been disrupted, how much has the insurance business really changed, question mark. But these businesses are now in a very different place to really challenge that, to really compete, to really look at what we do differently. But at the same time, they now need to really be delivering value. They're now in this scaling place. And do they then become the same challenges as some of the incumbents? So this dreaded word that everyone bands around all the time of legacy, how do these unicorns avoid this legacy situation as well? Are they going to continue to develop that tech? Or what's interesting is, are new people going to come in, learning from what's been created, and then really create stuff that's really going to deliver that value to the business? So if we look at what's happening at the moment, and I think really positively in terms of what you're all seeing, that there is AI use across the sector. There's AI use within the insurers, but I would really say that the insurtechs are leading in this space in terms of what they're doing, either creating capabilities for the insurer, or if they're going direct to the customer, utilizing their own capabilities and looking at how they can do things differently, how they can utilize the tech to do things differently. And if we look across kind of the value chain, and I've broken the value chain here down into what's happening in that product development, what's happening in pricing, customer acquisition, the whole management of that customer, and then on the claims end. And we think of most insurtechs, you can see where at some part in that process they are utilizing AI and they are trying to look at how we do things differently. The product and the pricing space is really interesting. Product development, there's a lot of utilization in terms of how they can do tech differently. Lemonade's a great example that uses AI in their actual development process. One thing that I think no one has really done in the sector yet is actually disrupted the actual product. So the product still looks pretty much identical to the product from 20, 30, 40 years ago. There's new risks coming in and they're being entered into the product, but the fundamentals of insurance haven't really changed. And the big question here, and I think the big question to people working in that space, is as we're learning more about the customer, as we have this data and we're looking at the data in a different way and finding different ways to assess the risk, does the product change? Big question. The reality is that all that years of learning might mean that the reason why the insurance product doesn't change and it still looks pretty identical to how it did previously is because it works. It's the right product in terms of profitability. You can't give any more to the customer. So there is that piece, but I think there's no one really looking to how do you really change the needle in this space? How do you really do things differently? The pricing space, though, is really interesting. I think very much an obvious place for what you would do with AI. And this is where insurtechs, I think, have some of the benefits in terms of not being stuck trying to deal with legacy issues. However, they don't necessarily have the data. And I think Darwin is a really good example of an InsurTech that's really focused on what do we want our competitive advantage to be? Where are we focusing? Let's dial down that needle. So Darwin is actually Direct Line's InsurTech. So they are a motor insurer solely focused on price comparison and solely focused on alternative pricing. So looking at how they can win on price comparison, win the right customers, using AI in their pricing. Now, they're really interesting in terms of how you set up an InsurTech within an incumbent and how you focus on one area and really deliver in that area. So they were set up completely outside of Direct Line. They have a plug going into the claims, but outside of that, they don't use anything in the Direct Line infrastructure. However, what they do is, because they have the funding behind them, they have a big team of pricing and AI and data scientists. And that was their focus, is winning this space. Now, what they didn't do was build their own tech. They actually outsourced their tech coming in. They outsourced pretty much everything other than that pricing piece, because that's where they were focused. I think that's a really interesting example of what is it you're trying to do? Where are you trying to win? So where do you focus on bringing that in, and where do you focus on building that yourself? And I'll go into that more in a second. Customer acquisition. I think customer acquisition is a really interesting place in terms of how do we prevent fraud at the outset? How do we bring in the right customers? How do we get customers in a different way? And this is where you would say the InsurTechs really have the lead on what the insurers are doing. So, and to be fair, the brokers and the price comparison in terms of that traditional marketing approach, that traditional advertising approach. How do we do stuff differently? WeFox is a great example of this. They're heavily focused on, in that acquisition, on using data to understand which customers they're going for, how are they targeting those customers, and using that to then improve their loss ratio at the back end. So some interesting stuff happening in this space, and I think this is an area where you'll see the insurers have to catch up in terms of thinking, how do I use data better to acquire those customers? In terms of the customer management, I think the challenge of how do we cross-sell has been an ongoing question of the industry for many, many years. And the challenge for the likes of the banks, how do we sell insurance to our customers? No one's really answered to the level. What tech gives us is that capability. The question is, can people deliver on that or not? And I think we're still waiting to see that. But there are some companies that are doing some good stuff in this customer management space. I think from a commoditized market perspective, so the UK, it is very challenging in terms of how do you sell more to that customer? How do you build loyalty with that customer when the price comparison's coming in and answering that question? If we look to more of the developing insurance markets, we're seeing that some of the InsurTechs really address that question. So ACO is a great example of their whole sort of strategy is how do we bring in a lot of customers at a low value and then sell more products to them? So they initially started off with working with Amazon, selling a very, very low value mobile insurance with very, very limited cover, but then they have that customer and they can sell to them. I think what we'll see with some of the InsurTechs that have been very successful in terms of raising money, the only way they can really deliver the value of their business is to be able to sell other products to them. If you look at the likes of Lemonade and the marketing spend that you've got to acquire that customer, how do you then sell other products to the customer? And I think the route to that is how do we better use AI to do that? How do we better understand that customer and what they're doing? And if we look then at the fintechs, very similar here. If I'm a fintech, and I know exactly what my customer's buying, when they're buying, what their behaviors are, how much money they're coming through, I should better know how to sell these products to them. And I think that is a massive area, and we're not quite there in that space. Other areas, claims. So claims, again, one of the early focuses in terms of how do we bring AI into insurance. Examples, you have the likes of the fraud area, so Shift Technology, what they're doing in this space, how do they take fraud out. We also have Tractable, how do we look at the claim, analyze the claim, take the person out of the low-risk claims. So how do we do different stuff in this place? I think one of the biggest challenges is claims is a really important area to the insurer. Claims is really where you deliver your value. It is your moment of truth. And so coming into this and bringing AI into this, you've got to make sure that that AI is delivering value for the customer, they're delivering a better experience for the customer, they're making it easier and enabling the employee to deliver where they can really deliver value, and it's economical. And I think one of the things in this claim space is challenges, is it economical? When we look at the costs, yes, there's savings from reducing fraud, but are we really bringing the economies through in here? And I think that's a big challenge in this space. How do we bring that through? And I think that really links to this question of buy versus build. And this is a challenge for the insurtechs, this is a challenge for the insurers, in terms of, should I be bringing in my own capabilities, my own data scientists, my own AI capabilities, and building them in-house? Or should I be buying services? And me personally, so I sat as I was a buyer of services, and looking at the team to say, should we be building this or should we be buying? I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment as a buyer is when you drill down is what is really the capability, what can you really do? So if we take an example of an underwriting bench, so there's a lot of talk at the moment in terms of how do you automate underwriting more? How do you bring data into that process more? And the underwriting directors have quite a clear idea of what they want and what capabilities they're looking for. And yet when you drill down into what's out there at the moment and what they can really do, there's a mismatch there, which then creates this challenge of, if I buy, do I really get what I need? And I think for all companies, it's about looking at what's your competitive advantage. What is it that you're really focused and you should be winning on? So what should you own? Should you be owning the pricing? Should you be owning the tech? Should you be owning the underwriting? And managing that and looking at your personal business. And you can see the example of Darwin's a great example of that. They needed AI people for that pricing. If they'd have outsourced that piece, that was their business. That's the key capability that they were building, to then be able to use that capability in other parts of the greater business as well. So I think this is a real challenging question in the space, and a question that will hopefully be answered over the next couple of years. So what's the future of InsurTech? I think the InsurTechs that are out there at the moment is about delivering value on the investments that have been made into them. They're now at this scaling stage of showing their worth. We'll see consolidation. So Lemonade's purchasing Metromile is a great example of that consolidation. It's also a great example of the buy versus build question. So Lemonade actually did build their car insurance, realized they couldn't do it to the level that they wanted to do it. Car insurance is actually quite a complex area, and then saw Metromile had what they wanted, and then looked at that, how do we acquire, how do we consolidate? So I think we'll see more and more of that coming through. What I hope that we'll see is the next generation coming through, learning from what's out there at the moment, and challenging this. What do they really do? What is it that I can do? I think we'll see a better understanding of what's needed, so what's the art of the possible, but what we can deliver. Some of the big trends people are talking about at the moment is the whole embedded insurance piece. Will the embedded insurance piece really happen? Will it deliver? Who's going to deliver that? Is it coming from the insurers? Is it coming from the insurtechs? Is it coming from the fintechs? Or is it coming from somewhere else? Is it coming from the Amazon? I think really interesting area, and it links to another trend question mark. Now that these insurtechs are well funded, they're looking to globalize. In insurance, that globalization has been a challenge in the past, especially in that personal lines space. Companies have looked to go out to other countries and then realized that actually the markets are different, the products are different, how they work in those markets are different. So the big question mark today is, has the customer changed so much that the customer is now very similar in the other markets? Or will they still have the same challenges when they go into other markets? And I think the biggest, best example is going from the UK to the US. I think there's quite a big difference in terms of how insurance works there, how advanced the UK personalised market is versus the US personalised market, and the challenges with the state regulation as well. So it will be interesting to see how companies achieve going that way, and then the companies coming into Europe as well. So lots of different stuff happening, lots of opportunities coming through, but I think from an AI perspective, the thing that we'll really see is that delivering of the real value, looking at where we work with it and where we deliver value, and looking at that where we need those people in-house and actually where we don't and where we need to buy those services.